Twice Upon a Planet by L.G. Wise. A new autumn day rang out as a field of tall grass blew in the windy shade of clouds overhead. The year was 3099 A.D. After searching so long for life on other worlds, the human race had found nothing with intelligence. The moon now orbited much farther away, confusing tides. Through many years of struggle, the species of the planet Earth had learned to coincide with nature and their fellow beings. There were no divisions, no tyrants, no borders. Rebuilding a broken past while the land regenerated itself, the few hundred left on Earth continued their society pretty much in peace. Everyone experienced countryside ways with the return of fresh air, trees, grass, and even some animal life. Wars and rulers purged the land from all that which had been against their visions of power, greed, and control. In this madness, the entire world could have been destroyed, if it were not for the mass awakening. No, not a religion, a reopening of the mind. Reptilian ignorance laid to rest, or so it seemed, for a while. After the discovery of nepsium, an element hidden in the ice of Pluto's satellite Chiron, studies found it enabled its user to go days, even weeks, without eating or sleeping. Humans necessitized the strange blue-silvery substance resembling melted frost into their lives. It was later called liquid nice. Only 3 tall buildings existed in the world. Because architecture only interested occupants of dual Earth, all structure belonged to them. One of the minor cities on Earth, Edion, was made up of a few small white domes, which spread out through different sides of great valleys and waterways. Many ruins were scattered throughout the world, both from battles won and lost. Most people had taken refuge to other planets. Mars soon became a secondary Earth. 2/3 of the human population thrived there. During the Dark Turn century, the people of Earth fell victim to an intergalactic war, forgotten by the later generation who truly believed there had not yet been human contact with aliens. But by this time they had developed acute hearing abilities, which in the end gave good advantage to their survival. Little was left standing on the planet's surface. What used to be the mighty, tall New York City now stood a cracked monument statue of the first military general who said, "With eyes open and hearts united, we shall once again begin our journey to the stars." In the first light, there was much curiosity about Mars, whether it was once inhabited by an older, wiser race, or if life there had never evolved beyond microbes. For many centuries, stories and moving pictures told of gallant battles and fierce beings who rampaged the Red Planet. But all of this was taken into different perspective when humanity set its feet in Martian soil and later proclaimed it theirs. Earth, however, was no longer seen as a special, irreplaceable home. Now that it had been possible to terraform any pleasing planet, Earth was simply tossed aside for the more simple-minded. But among these farm babies came a strong voice, that voice of wonder, which stands upon the very heels of the human spirit. A young beauty named Tyrelsa, eyes of grayish blue, long auburn hair, stood in the middle of a tall grass field, wearing a flowing magenta dress. She held her arms out to the sky, closed her eyes, and breathed in the chilly air. The wind seemed to whisper to her from all around. Bolts of thunder furiously rumbled through the sky. Little raindrops started to fall. Tyrelsa ran back inside her dome house, where she had lived with her mother Nendi and her brother Dāce since she was a child. Her father, Jenka Hummins, was living his life in orbit of Saturn's moon planet Titan, as an SV-1 officer of the Outer Atmosphere Stationary Institute of Starcrafts, or Space Station Oasis. His job was reconnoitering the harmful shock waves of nearby asteroidal collisions in the outer solar system. Jex was monitoring a screen using a hydrogen stabilizer crystal. an instrument which looks like a diamond, very small, sometimes orange or blue, depending on the frequency. Around the main control room were highly organized photoplasmic machines, which remained operative at all times. On Titan, they had already excavated its murky surface. Short, slimy lake creatures which could survive the poisonous atmospheric gases were found swarming through the moon's planet's sensitive terrain. It was once unimaginable for anyone to think of such things discovered on other worlds. Jex lifted his attention to the room and did his routine check.
Are the channels clear on levels 130 to 150?
The crew responded one by one. Jex leaned back in his chair, pondering with hands folded behind his head. His hair glistened a shade of both brown and red under the control room lights above.
You know, I haven't seen my planet in decades. I wonder how the core regrowth project is doing.
Jex laughed to himself, then paused for a moment, brought up an advanced viewer glass, bearing a striking photo-like image of Earth in the distance.
I wonder what they're up to on that little blue dot out there.
In Edeon City, Tyrelsa sat with Nendi and Dāce around a large triangular table in the kitchen. Triangles had been largely recognized as the mark of good health and peace, so they were commonly used in ecumenical settings. The inside of their house had powder blue walls, automatic doors, and a twin staircase, giving it a very modern look, though you can hardly tell from its countryside surroundings. Nendi was a well-seasoned woman of 40-ish, in old Earth years, with hair and eyes like her daughter's, only minutely darker, the one in the family most in favor of taking Eon tablets for their youthful effects. Being quite fond of her glass spinner collection, Nendi would sit and watch them hours a day, many shining tops hanging pristinely in a zero-gravity loop. It can make you dizzy to give them your full eye for too long, but a modest decoration, it was well becoming. At first glance, Dāce's features would appear to lunge out at you. Catching you across a room with his stark green eyes, you knew when he was watching. Dāce, just like all who were brought up on dual Earth, had an ochroid tint to his human pigment. As a result, he would assume a sort of fluorescent quality during night hours. Dāce's favorite activity, composing ambersynth music, gradually took up most of his time. Ambersynth was the evolutionary form of Old Earth's concept of musical design. Nothing like music as people once knew it, the alphabetic notes were replaced by numeric syllables. You'd only use one instrument called the shrill, which looks something like a transparent, paper-thin, sharp-edged stick with lines carved in. To play, you'd have to first find a heated area, like in direct sunlight or near a candle. You could then create a wild, airy, high-pitched sound by waving the shrill around. Slow to play light music, fast to make it loud. The idea was to experiment with different methods. Though usually into much the opposite, he was a quiet soul who only spoke if he really had something to say. Other times he'd politely nod with a smile. This being a moment of annoying silence, Dāce decided to speak his mind. He set down his fork and began.
I often think of Dad now and again.
Do you? What about?
Nendi passed the salt to Tyrelsa.
I think about what if he came home. We might all forget about the blackness of the sky at night and stay.
But why should we forget?
Tyrelsa looked at her brother sitting across from her.
I think it's beautiful, space and all that. I believe there are great minds out there. We just haven't met up with them yet.
Dāce sank in his chair and stared at the ceiling with a small sigh. He knew his sister wouldn't understand. She seldom did when it came to their father. Dāce is her older brother, therefore has seen a lot more of him than Tyrelsa, who was born some 6 years earlier. He did not approve of his father's leaving to venture out in space. What is space? Why not visit the ocean or the great macrocenter? Big Martian tourist attraction. Oh yes, Turum was alive and well. It seems there's just no limit to a moron with scales. Scales, or sometimes dark scales, were used in substitute of the old Earth's currency. Although they weren't real scales, they were certainly a lot easier to handle than any plastic or paper. This, too, stirred in Dāce's mind. Tyrelsa slightly frowned.
I didn't mean to talk over you, Dāce. I'm sorry. I know how it is when someone ignores you. I once had a kitten, pretty little thing. Gave me lots of attention when I first got him. But as he grew older, there was a rift between us. He changed, and eventually ran away. Never saw that cat again. So I know what it's like.
She went back to her lunch. She would need an Eon tablet and a glass of liquid nice to gulp it down. People on Earth took Eon tablets for maintaining youth, energy, and mental alertness. A real age-defier. According to old Earth standards, she was a bright-eyed, smashing sweet 17-year-old. But by Eon Age standards, she was well over 100. Dāce just shrugged it off and carried on with his day. Each early morning, Tyrelsa would go out and run through the fields surrounding her house. She loved to let the sunrise dance on her face. If it was windy, she'd lay on a mound staring up at pictures in the sky. Some days, she'd sneak around outside the flat-top fence encircling a very large abode to watch a strange young man walk out from his house. This passionate girl's heart was set on him, although in the back of her mind, she did not know why. Her way of life remained, for the most part, jovial and content. But lately, she'd been stilled. Something called to her. Tyrelsa, being always an adventurous, occasionally mischievous person, her curiosity was often what brought her to daydream. Her mother worried of her interest in the sky and always spending so much time outside. One day, while Tyrelsa was walking to her favorite location, she stopped in her tracks as her face lit up with shock. For as far as she could see, the field of tall grass had turned into a field of lavender flowers. Tyrelsa thought quietly to herself.
But how can this be? There hasn't been a flower for decades, and yet this place is blooming wildly.
At that moment, she was too amazed to speak. She'd never seen a real live flower outside of books and the Vividex, a computing system capable of producing solid third-dimensional objects. Tyrelsa noticed that the lavender field had an unnatural look to it now. She ran the fastest she could to tell someone of this wondrous happening. It was only unfortunate that when she arrived back at home, Dāce was missing. She burst through the door, the time at 10 o'clock a.m., but inside the house it was not well lit. While trying not to trip over anything, she searched all the rooms.
Mom? Mom? Anybody? Ouch!
She stumbled on an unseen chair.
Where are you all?
At last, as the distressed young girl stopped to catch her breath, she found Nendi standing in the kitchen, drinking liquid nice by the window. Tyrelsa, glad to see her, rushed over and gave her a hug. Nendi set her glass down on the table.
Tyrelsa, what's going on?
I've been to the field again, Mom. The strangest, most fascinating thing has happened. The tall grass has been turned into lavender flowers. Come with me. I'll show you. I know you don't believe me. How could you believe me? How could anyone?
Nendi stopped Tyrelsa there. Putting her hands on her hips, she stared down at her hyper daughter with squinted eyes.
You've been imagining things again, haven't you? I'll agree to come and look, but if I only see grass,
No, it's real this time. I hardly take truth to my own eyes.
Taking her mother by the hand, they both left, running off into the field. Nendi saw a faint glow coming from ahead and began to wonder if Tyrelsa really wasn't imagining it all. They returned to a very special location of the field and looked around. Both of them found puzzlement. Nendi didn't see anything except for the grass that had been there since. Tyrelsa was surprised to see that her field of lavender flowers had vanished away. Nendi turned her back in bafflement.
honestly, Tyrelsa, you come out here every day. It's not a healthy thing to be doing. And now you take me all this way to show me an imaginary lavender field. Now listen. I love you and will work this out. But maybe Dāce was right. Maybe your dad shouldn't have left you to grow up under the watch of one.
Tyrelsa turned around and threw her hands up.
Dad doesn't have anything to do with it. I tell you, when I came here, those flowers was real as you and me. They were. Sure, I daydream a lot, but it doesn't affect my mental health like you're implying. Please, Mother, you should really be thinking about where Dāce went.
Nendi faced Tyrelsa with a serious look.
What's this about Dāce? Isn't he back at the house?
No, I haven't seen him since yesterday evening.
Nendi was in total disbelief of what she just heard, so without another word, she started back to their house. Tyrelsa, left alone again, stared down at the ground lazy-eyed, noticing a purpled something laying there at her feet. She picked it up and examined it closely. Her eyes widened. She gasped. It was a flower. A lavender flower. Confused and a little frustrated, Tyrelsa decided to find a place to sit and think. It was near supper time now. The sun was ready to set. She happened by a rock patch, having a vague memory that she'd been there before, a long time ago. Her hair draped down over her shoulder as she climbed onto the highest rock, only 6 feet up. Its surface lay flat as she sat and looked out beyond an ongoing range of pale yellowing land. Mountains mixed with forever sky could be seen in the distance. Nothing industrial tainted the ravishing view. The purity of the air hypnotized her senses. She nearly tranced out when there appeared a shadow on the ground. The lonely one turned and looked down to see the face of a man familiar. He spoke.
Miss, pardon me, but what is your name?
A little startled to be spoken to by him, she fidgeted nervously, then answered.
It's Tyrelsa.
Tyrelsa? That's a pretty name.
He politely took off his hat and tossed it hand to hand.
I just wanted to know because I've seen you hanging about my fence.
Oh?
She blushed, scratching her head to prevent looking awkward.
Yes, you're not a very good spy.
He smirked.
Thanks. Neither are you.
They laughed together, then a short pause.
So, do you always roam amidst these funny-looking stones?
He glanced sideways as if something in the distance caught his eye.
I come here quite often, actually. I use the sovereignty to help me gain peace of mind.
He nodded slightly.
Leaving your house. You do that often as well. How come?
He squinted at the sun, hitting his face. For them, the sun took hours to go down.
I'm not one to tell just anyone where I'm going. My ideas can take me places. People find that abnormal.
Well, I don't. Intriguing, maybe, but never abnormal. I was just wondering about the reason for it, that's all.
She tucked the strand of hair behind her left ear.
I study things. Everything has its own special explanation. I enjoy life, but I also love to search for the hidden meaning behind it.
You just don't hear that kind of talk from anyone these days.
Her winged voice flew softly in the wind to his sensitive ears.
How's that?
Tyrelsa noticed him again. It brought back the feeling. Of course, she knew she was talking to herself, but really hadn't expected him to overhear. If it had been anyone else, they'd not give a second thought.
Nothing. I didn't say anything.
She kept tapping her foot against the rock she was sitting on.
It must be a little, I don't know, empty to live all by yourself.
To tell you the truth, I don't much think about stuff like that. I was always an outcast growing up. Never really had the chance to know my folks.
He folded his arms.
They were fine scientists, especially my father. He was the one who told me I could amount to anything and I didn't need anyone. Just some money and a way to get around. One day they went away. I was only 7. When I saw them again, 2 years later, they were different. Vegetized.
Oh, how horrible.
I later found out it was a member of a well-known corporation on the Red Planet who had done the dirty work. I knew to never cross them.
I don't know much about the history of Dual Earth. I'll have to visit the Vividex.
She felt a cold breeze blow in.
I've got to be going now, Miss Tyrelsa.
Wait, I didn't get your name.
Oh, I'm Nevlin Corton.
Pleased to meet you, Nevlin.
You too.
His goodbye was put in one everyday wave. Before she could blink, he vanished like a phantom in the now fading daylight. Her heart was sent fluttering across the time-space canopy as her feet moved swiftly on home. Darkness fell. Nendi was pretty concerned at the fact her daughter had not returned home yet.
Where is she?
She asked the clock. Dāce was in the room with her at the time and overheard.
She'll be back. Don't fret. Think about something else. Why don't you water your cantaloupe garden?
Oh, all right. Let me know when she gets back.
Just as Nendi left, Tyrelsa walked in, closed the door carefully, leaned back, and sighed dreamily. Scanning the room, she saw Dāce sitting by a hologrammatic image of a lighted fireplace.
Oh, hi, Dāce. How are you?
Tyrelsa had a rather surprised look on her face, a natural sort of reaction for his sister, who hadn't seen him for several hours. Now he's back again. Where had he gone to? A clock hanging on the wall told the time, 8:00 p.m. Dāce looked at her with a smile and a nod.
Dāce, come on. Don't I deserve a greeting?
Dāce stood up and walked over.
I can see by the look on your face that you've been wondering about my absence.
He stretched to the ceiling.
Well, to sum things up, I was out of town, visiting a friend. Does that explain?
No, it doesn't. Who?
It wouldn't be in my best interest to tell.
It isn't that loner who roams around the rock patch, is it?
How did you know he goes to the... I mean, no.
You can't lie to me, Dāce. I already met him.
You met him? When?
Today. That's why I was so late coming back.
But 2 hours?
Dāce kept looking down the hall leading to the other room, just in case their mother were to walk in on their discussion.
We just talked. He's an odd fellow. I've seen him before.
Don't let any of this out, Tyrelsa. He's not recognized as the good type around here. He's had problems with the law on Dual Earth.
She pondered for a minute or two. Something just wasn't fitting right. She tried not to awaken the quiet moment.
Dāce? If this man is so terrible, then why do you consider him to be a friend?
Laughing at hearing this, he shook his head the way one would if they knew it all.
Let's just put it this way. There's nobody else like him. We need more of his kind.
Well, I can see that.
Who was this smart, dark, and handsome roaming stranger? Tyrelsa wasn't sure, although she felt very happy to finally meet the charming lad she'd been admiring from afar for so long. Why, one of the biggest reasons she even went outdoors was to be a dreamy-eyed onlooker. She wasn't clear on what her brother was trying to tell her, but things were in their rarest form of clarity. She couldn't wait to greet the morning to come. Tyrelsa, caught up in her own scattered thoughts, didn't pay too much attention to the rambling.
Tyrelsa!
Yes?
Something important to say here. Then it's back to my composition.
Ah, a new song. What's it called?
Dāce couldn't help himself when asked about his music. In that way, he tended to be a little pressing on ego. He went over to a chair, picked up a piece of paper, and read from it the title.
Rakis. Wait a minute, don't change the subject.
He set the paper down again, knowing only the pictures on the wall may hear.
I wasn't...
Anyway, have you noticed the offbeat silence of this city? It's because
A rustling sound came from the other room. Nendi entered with hurry. She had heard them raising their voices and figured something was up. She addressed Tyrelsa as Dāce sat back down at his holofire.
There you are! Where have you been? You weren't behind me when I got back here.
Tyrelsa paced around the room relentlessly.
I've been, talking with Dāce, but I feel pretty sleepy right now.
She cupped her hand over mouth, pretending to yawn.
I think I should go up to my restoration chamber. Good phase.
Tyrelsa ended the discussion there, retiring to her room upstairs. She didn't want to talk of what happened that day, nor bring up the plucked flower she still carried. Downstairs, Nendi was weighing her worries, pondering on whether or not she should try to talk it out with Tyrelsa. Dāce finally discouraged her by promising he'd straighten things out next time he saw her. Over some weeks, she told others around the region about her strange experience. Everyone thought she was out of her dot, crazy. But whenever she beckoned to the sky, still the strange sounds could be heard. Though the subtle wind-blended noise didn't make sense to her, this would only happen when she was completely alone. One cloudless night, Tyrelsa awoke from a lucid dream, went outside across the field and stood there, gazing at a bright star in the distance. The star seemed to pulsate, moved transversely, in an odd way toward the horizon. Looking at her hands, she saw they were glowing with many colors.
Am I still dreaming?
Just then she looked up. The star she had seen was missing. Whispery sounds came from all around. Things became distorted. She was captured in a faded image of an ellipsoidal object, from up high on the very top of the dark sky. She awoke in a jolted manner and saw that it was morning. It had only been a dream. Or was it? It was just as real as she ever knew. Her mother walked in carrying a tray of vitaminerals, Eon tablets, and a glass of lime juice. Nendi set the tray down on a marble table.
What were you doing in the field late last night?
Tyrelsa got out of her restoration chamber and stretched.
What do you mean?
I saw you get up out of your room and go outside. Your clothes are dirty.
She pointed to the clothes Tyrelsa was wearing. Tyrelsa looked down at herself and was shocked to see bits of twigs and soil from outside all over.
But I...
She paused for a moment.
It was just a dream, wasn't it?
The befuddled, tired old woman looked at her in absolute grief.
Tyrelsa, you are not well. Stay in and rest.
But her curious daughter did not listen. That night she left the house and walked over to the beautiful field near the lake. She stood there with arms out wide to the sky, with hope something from a dream would begin. She did hear a voice, but glancing over her shoulder, she saw it was only her mother running through the field toward her, yelling her name. Tyrelsa turned her eyes forward again. She saw the same strange bright star, just as had been in her dream the night before.
Then it wasn't a dream. I was really out here.
This time the star moved faster. She looked down at her hands. Sure enough, they were glowing even more than ever. Blue, purple, then salient white.
Next is that strangely shaped object. Maybe it wants me to travel with it.
At that moment, her mother was still running towards her. Suddenly, Nendi encountered an unseen barrier. Tyrelsa could hear her, but for some reason could not see her. Their voices sounded like echoes in a million caves.
Mom! Mom! Are you all right? Where are you?
This response was the last she heard.
It's a valve! It's a valve! It's a valve! Some kind of force! I can't!
Indeed, the shielding beam electrically stopped Nendi from going any further. but she could still see the events unraveling on the other side. She observed her daughter enveloped in a kind of coronal band of primary colored lights sent out from a barely visible rotating object. The lights flickered left, right, then diagonal in perpendicular patterns all over her into the area where she was standing. She began to levitate, no longer touching the ground. Nendi was frightened. Her hands shook, her face clenched, her mouth hung open. She threw herself again and again against the shield, feeling utterly helpless. Nendi was cut off in the middle of trying to communicate with Tyrelsa. They were shouting desperately to each other across the field. It took no less than a dipole moment when, simultaneously, Tyrelsa and the lights vanished, like a flitter of shadow glass.